I do sometimes think, you must get sick of hearing me whittle on about IR35, and then every now and again I get something where I think, no, obviously we're on a different planet. Yeah. The thing is with IR35, whilst it's got its problems, certainly in its existing way of living, I'm not sure repealing it would be an answer.
HMRC are active, aren't they?
Yes, but again, coming back to the commercial point, are they as active as they could be, should be? I know they're not a business, but if I ran their business, I would be getting them out a lot more.
I'm sure you are asked, as we are, this question quite a lot. What are Labour going to do with I-35?
The difficulties if you then have exemptions or you have specific tests for each industry, you're adding lots of complexities to it, and I suspect HMRC won't want to go there.
Hi there, and welcome back to another episode of Your Own Accounts with Qdos. I'm Seb Maley.
I'm Nicole Sloy.
And our guest today is one of the most sought-after experts and advisors in the employment tax and contingent labour space, partner at BDO, John Chaplin. Welcome, John.
Thank you. After that, I think I should go now.
Yeah, so thanks for joining us today. Obviously, we have known each other for probably quite a scary amount of time now.
Yep.
But it'd be great to just start in terms of your background and kind of how you obviously partner at BDO now. What's been your journey to this point?
A weird and wonderful one is the honest answer. Just goes to show how life can throw you some opportunities that you don't necessarily know until later on. I actually started out as a qualified engineer, just about the time in the UK economy when heavy engineering fell off a cliff face. So I found myself with the opportunity of developing another career, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And I went through the civil service entrance examinations. And so there they ask you to choose if you're successful, and somehow I managed to be successful. I was asked to choose 3 locations and 3 elements of the civil service that I might like to work in. Mm-hmm. They gave me none of those 3 locations and none of the 3 departments. Instead, I ended up with what is now HMRC, what was then Inland Revenue, as a collector of taxes. There's no looking back, I think, after that. I then subsequently left Inland Revenue to join the profession. I don't know whether that's gamekeeper turned poacher or poacher turned gamekeeper. You can have that debate forever, I think. I've stuck with employment taxes in one form or another for far too many years now. And the reason for it is that no 2 days are the same, even with employment status. I think if I'd tapped myself on the shoulder however many years ago and went, you'll still be dealing in employment status in all those years, I would have given myself more than a quizzical look, I think. But here we are today.
Yeah. And what was that move from the civil service and the public sector into private practice? What was that like? I mean, I imagine it might be tricky for some people, but did it feel natural for you?
And I mean, I've seen it both ways. I think the thing that part of the reason for me leaving the civil service was I thought that they weren't commercial, if I'm being perfectly honest. They were too process driven, too by the book, and the trigger for me was when I was told I'd found some problems on employment status, funnily enough, in one particular sector, and so we were visiting all of the businesses locally that operated in that sector, and lo and behold, they were all doing the same thing. And I was told not to. Instead of using intelligence-based targeting, go back onto the computer, just chunks out a number at random. So I'd be going out and speaking to somebody, and in some cases they got no employees, so they're hardly going to get employment tax wrong. And I just thought there's got to be a better way of doing this. So I decided to move to the other side, as they say. Now, I didn't find it too difficult. I think that the biggest thing is that sometimes clients go, well, I know what the rules are, but there's got to be a greyness. So how can you help me be compliant with the legislation but still operate my business in the way that I want to? And you have to navigate all those little bumps and what have you. Whereas when you're the policeman of the system, you can just say, well, no, the rule book says this, that or the other, and then leave them to fashion it. So but that's the bit which I like. I like to, yes, most things in life are not as black and white as people would like them to be. The greyness is what I earn my living on.
Yeah. And would you say that in terms of that lack of commerciality at HMRC, would you say that is still the case now? Having, obviously you're long gone in terms of having not worked there for a long time, but have they improved at all in that regard?
They had a period where they did improve significantly, where they had risk-based assessments on, and they do a lot of that. So actually now they should come out knowing more about the business than just what the name on the door says or whatever. But they've also the beauty when I was within HMRC was that you were given a lot of autonomy. You were told what the rules were, but you negotiated with the taxpayers. You did some quite senior stuff at a relatively junior level, whereas now it's like the computer says no. So they'll tell you what the computer says, and then you challenge back, and they don't know. They're not as in-depth specialists as I would like them to be. Yeah. Until you get to the senior people at policy, and senior people at policy in the nicest possible way want to be senior people at policy and not dealing with taxpayers on a regular basis. So there's a gap in the middle where I think they could be so much better if they had specialists with a lot more commercial, practical knowledge, being prepared to go out and have conversations with business on a more regular basis. Yeah. Dare I say it, I think they've reduced the staff numbers probably a little bit too far.
Yeah. Okay, and then if we look at where we are now, I mean, I guess we've had a lot of turbulence over the last few years with the legislative changes and deferrals, delays, the implementation ultimately in 2021 of Chapter 10. Where do you think we are now in terms of HMRC are active, aren't they?
Yes, but again, coming back to the commercial point, are they as active as they could be, should be? Yeah, I know they're not a business, but if I ran their business, I would be getting them out a lot more. Yeah, because I think we're in that starting to come out of it. So HMRC activity is most definitely picking up, but they're still in the information gathering stage a lot. And they're great at asking lots of questions and then going away for a long time and then either disappearing entirely or coming back and asking the same questions again in many cases. Yeah. So they're in that position now, but we are starting to see the pickup in compliance activity. And it's probably an awful thing to say, but it's people listen when they hear that something bad has happened to someone else. So we're starting to get clients and contacts now saying, I'm starting to get a bit nervous about what I do. Can we re-look at it? Whereas a year ago, that we'd have probably got, well, that's nice, but I think we're fine. We looked at it 2 years, 3 years ago. Yeah. Nothing's gone wrong. HMRC don't seem to be caring about it. So, maybe we'll put that slightly lower down the list.
Yeah, and as you say, that does make people nervous. But do you think it's, I guess the market seems to, when you look at inside-outside roles, there seems to be an increase in the proportion of outside roles. Yeah. As in, is that people softening their view or getting to grips with their compliance obligations? But obviously, more compliance activity could have the opposite impact, couldn't it?
Well, it's like a pendulum. I think the pendulum swung too far one way when the legislation came out for the private sector. Yeah. Lots of organisations who, dare I say it, for a long time had probably been taking a slightly blasé approach to contractors because it wasn't their risk effectively. Yep. I think the record I saw was a contractor who'd been with the client for 27 years. Okay. Having previously been an employee. And I was asked the question, well, do we think we've got an IR35 problem? And I said IR35 is the least of your worries. What about pension? And they went, oh. So I think the pendulum swung where organisations went, well, if it's my risk now, I'm going to try and eradicate that risk in many cases. And that's fine, but being in business is about sometimes taking strategic risk and planned risk and managing that risk. So what we've started to see is over the last year or two, people being more prepared to hire people and put them outside of IR35. Sometimes I think it depends on who you speak to. I've still got lots of contacts where I think, you could actually be a bit more commercial in your approach to contractors. And I'm also seeing ones where I think, well, I think you probably, if you're not careful, you're in danger of the pendulum swinging too far back. And you won't know until it's tested. So we're having lots of conversations at the moment with clients about, okay, 3 years in, and in reality, 3 years in plus whatever time it was before then that you planned your position now, you really ought to be looking at managing your risk and just checking whether it's the right thing for you and how you approach it, and whether what you designed is actually being operated in practice. And HMRC are starting to do that, particularly for the larger clients with their business risk reviews. So they're starting to ask the questions where, tell us how, and why do you think that's right? And that's the ones where some organisations are being pulled up a little short.
And how would you typically advise clients who have maybe been in that more risk-averse position where they maybe had a policy ban, only had a couple of PSCs by exception? How would you advise them making the compliant steps forward to reconsidering their position on engaging PSCs?
So I think it's the same whichever end of the dial you're. I mean, a good process, a good system, a good risk management approach is the same wherever you're coming at it from. The drivers as to why they get there sometimes are different. So what do I mean by that is sometimes it's you might have a change at senior board level. You might have their business might be struggling. They may have been making money hand over fist 5 years ago, and now are looking for cost-effective ways of managing their workforce. They may be, they may have won a nice big project, and they're finding that all of the contractors are going, no way, I'm not. If I want to work for you as under IR35 deductions, then I'm on a whatever uplift, and and I'm not coming to you if I don't get it. There can be all sorts of drivers. It's trying to understand what those drivers are and manage them and balance them off against the tax risk. So it's very difficult. Sometimes it comes from the board. Sometimes it comes from the in-house tax people. Sometimes, more often than not, it comes with the in-house tax people or the finance function. Basically getting a bit fed up of the commercial end of the business saying, you are tying us up in knots here. You are, if you want us to make whatever profit growth over the next year, you need to reassess how we approach our contingent workforce.
And how do you think the level of knowledge around those sorts of approaches on IR35 is in the private sector with medium and large organisations?
It's varied. I think that's probably the polite way of putting it. I know lots of people at some big organisations who know a hell of a lot around off payroll, and I'm not going to go in and be stupid enough to try and teach them how to do their job properly. But then I work with them to go, okay, sometimes the business just needs somebody from outside to verify and vindicate what the process is. But even I had one last week where I had to check in on several occasions during the conversation where the clients didn't think that they were caught by Chapter 10.
Really?
And it was, well, you are. And even things like, so what do I have to do? Well, you should be doing status determinations. You should be issuing those status determinations. If you don't follow it, you're automatically liable. And they were going, but how formal do they have to be? And it's I do sometimes think, you must get sick of hearing me whittle on about IR35, and then every now and again I get something where I think, no, obviously we're on a different planet.
How have you seen any involvement with recruitment agencies yet? So I mean, all of the checks that we've had have been very much focused at client end, but ultimately, the primary liable party is the fee payer. Have you seen HMRC involve agencies at all in the compliance process?
I haven't seen much of that activity so far. I've got to be honest, and again, it comes back to whether HMRC are doing much about it and should be doing more about it. I think they should. They tend to, business risk reviews being the classic one of that is, what processes do you have? And most organisations now have some sort of outsourcing process for their contingent workforce, whether it's a single MSC or whether it's a preferred supplier list or whatever. but I've not yet seen that go back to, sort of trickle down to the agencies concerned and say, right, yeah, so we understand you work for XYZ PLC. You're the fee payer. What are you doing to manage that?
Yeah.
I think they're still probably putting that responsibility firmly and squarely on the end client's shoulders.
Yeah.
I've also seen a minority of agencies, thankfully not the household name ones, where they are out in the market offering sort of like a what can only be described as IR35 avoidance strategies.
Really?
So, give us all of these workers and we'll guarantee them being outside of IR35.
Really?
And you go, well, yes, as a fee payer, that may be legally their risk, but reputationally, commercially, do you really want to be engaged in those sorts of organisations? So, that's starting to build up. And dare I say, we're in a position in the economy now where if somebody comes along and says, I'm going to, I could save you 10, 20% on your contingent workforce costs, why would you not at least have a conversation?
Exactly.
Yeah. And presumably those sort of agency approaches that you refer to, that's people who are positioning contracted out services, statements of work type structures. How much of a black hole do you think that potentially represents for clients?
I think it's a massive black hole, but I'm not sure. I've spoken to HMRC about it, and I think they get it, but I'm not sure they get it in terms of doing much about it at this stage. Statements of work and all that sort of stuff. Technically they can be very good and can work, but if I think I've got to be careful that I don't give any trade secrets away here. But if you're speaking to an agency who's hiring contingent workers for somebody who works in the defence agency industry and makes themselves out to be a statement of work and delivering a service for that, and that is some fairly high-end, high-tech, secret, dangerous stuff. I'm not sure I'd want to be that agency taking on board that responsibility and liability. So probably are they doing that? No, they're really just managing a contingent workforce. So I'm not sure. Either it works technically and then the agency's taking on some fairly big commercial risks, or more likely it doesn't work technically and everybody's fooling themselves around it working.
And Chapter 8 still exists. And obviously we've seen quite a long line of high-profile cases, which still seem to be ongoing. But HMRC have seem to have a very specific strategy around that. I mean, do you think that's something that they have? They've got a hit list of these kind of TV presenters, radio presenters, sports broadcasters?
Yeah, well, as long as they don't go on to podcast presenters, we're all right, aren't we? I mean, how the hell do you unravel that one? There's lots of high-profile cases. HMRC have won quite a number of them. When they've lost them, they appeal and come back and come back and come back. And I've got to say, I've been involved around the edges on a couple of them, and it's not a nice place to be. I think if you're some of those individuals. But then, how much do they help the wider contingent workforce to understand what IR35 is? I think they just create a lot of heat and not a lot of light, if I'm being perfectly honest. If you're a TV or a radio presenter and you don't know about that and you're not all over it, then you've been on a different planet somewhere. But if you're a IT contractor and you want to understand mutuality of obligation or control or personal service or whatever, I think you've got to be a lawyer to be able to understand some of the technicalities of it. Never mind translate it to what you do in the day job. So I'm not sure. I get it, but I do wonder how many of these are a little bit vanity projects from HMRC's perspective.
And it really does highlight the issues with the process. I mean, you look at the Kay Adams case, for example, the fact that went to 4 tribunals ultimately. And when you were in a position where the costs for HMRC presumably far outweigh the tax at stake. You're thinking, why are you doing that? And obviously, Kay Adams had the resources to be able to put it through 4 tribunals. A typical contractor wouldn't.
Yeah. Well, and therefore then when I could easily sit here and have a go at organisations which say I'm just not going to have any contractors, anything other than via PAYE in one way or another. Yeah, you don't need that many for it to be a big issue. And if you're not prepared to go all of the way and have the costs in respect of tribunal and barrister and KC costs and all that sort of stuff, then you are getting yourself only in a position where you're managing it to a level where you pass the first inspection.
Yeah.
So nobody challenges you. So, and the nicest possible way is to pass that first inspection is probably a higher bar than to be correct. So what I mean by that is for HMRC to go away happy, you are going to probably have to be doing things which are beyond the point of somebody being self-employed, comfortably self-employed. So the first blush is, okay, you've got this sorted by quite a margin.
Yeah.
Again, we're back into commerciality.
Yeah. Yeah. And what about if we, IR35 has taken the limelight and IR35 and the off-payroll rules over the last few years, but what do you think the situation is outside of IR35 when it comes to employment tax? So, there is still, status issues affecting sole traders, and then you also have the onshore intermediaries legislation for those who are going through an agency.
Yeah.
Is that something that HMRC are active in policing at the moment?
Yes. I would say that IR35 over the last few years has almost become the acronym for self-employment.
Yeah.
So I often have conversations with clients where they go, I want to talk to you about IR35, and actually what they've got is lots of sole traders. And you have to start the conversation by explaining what the difference is and who's liable and all that type of thing.
Yeah.
But in reality, the tests are broadly the same, if not exactly the same in most cases.
Yeah.
So, it is there. Probably from when you get away from PSCs, there are other pushes and pulls around employment status. So on sole traders, there's these worker rights, there's employment law, which is obviously as important, if not more so. There's minimum wage and all that sort of thing. So that tends to be a much more packaged approach to it, and dare I say it, probably businesses that use large numbers of self-employed workers tend to be, huge rule of thumb, but tend to be a little bit ahead of the game in terms of managing their risk, because they probably built up that model over many, many years. And before IR35 came along, there was still a pay-as-you-earn risk because it was the engager's responsibility from day one. Onshore intermediaries, I think that's a bit of legislation which probably has gone away from people's minds as much as perhaps it as much as it has, and it shouldn't have done. And the best way I can describe that is to just remind people of MSC and managed service company legislation. 3 years ago, people had forgotten about that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Now look where we are. So I wouldn't be surprised if it might be 5-10 years away, or it might be 5 weeks away. I've no idea. There could be something out there around the onshore intermediaries.
Yeah, because it's quite a brutal legislation, really, in that it's just supervision, direction, and control, isn't it? So you haven't got the whole substitution area to rely on or anything like that. It's and you would think that HMRC would potentially see it as quite a good weapon for them to use. But...
Yeah, absolutely, and it may well need a test case in the end. And you've got also the bit there, which is you don't actually need to have any of those in place. You just need to have the right to be able to supervise, direct.
That's a huge, and that's an area I think is massively overlooked in IR35 as well. In terms of that, it's not just about what actually happens, and you've seen that in a lot of those kind of high-profile cases around the sort of framework of control or the right to have a control.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's obviously it's very difficult to put a robust argument forward for that when it's all hypothetical.
And I think we may get on to statutory employment tests and what have you in the fullness, but my guess would be that if they were to bring in anything along those lines, it wouldn't be that far away from the SDC test for onshore intermediaries. Why Well, I was going to say, why would they have different legislation? I'll shut up because they've got lots of different legislation.
Yeah, and I suppose if we think about that, then in terms of the statutory, I mean, it's obviously a bugbear for many people that we are using case law from 1968, you know, to determine status, and it is a myriad of you know, a real maze for people to try and to get a handle on. What do you think it's likely to happen at some point? Do you think the government are going to look at that again? I mean, we had the Taylor review and so on, but that was very quickly put in a drawer somewhere.
Yeah. Oh God. Right. Well, honestly, I don't know. There's got to be something, because otherwise we're going to have. I mean, case law is case law. That's great, but it doesn't apply to everybody unless you happen to be doing exactly that same job in the same circumstances at the same time. Because even case law becomes out of date. You know, we've got tests now which wouldn't have mattered 20, 30, 40 years ago, now are massively important. You've also got the fact that if you simplify it by having statutory employment tests, which I'll come back to, but I think they probably will do at some point. The danger is that what you're going to do is you're going to you might simplify it and make a lot of people who probably should be employees for tax purposes at least caught by that legislation and therefore having employment taxes deducted. But you're also going to have a massive percentage of people who are clearly self-employed but are caught by those statutory employment tests. So if they bring it in, they're going to have, and I think this is why it's not happened yet, and why if it were to happen, it would be hopefully a long time in the implementation, because if they do something quickly and easily and simple, it's going to be as ineffective as what we've got now, because it will just have people playing by a different set of rules. And my fear is, I don't know, let's say they bring in something which says unless you can provide a substitute, you're going to be caught as a deemed employee. Then that opens the book up for people having false substitution clauses in contracts. And therefore that we're going to have all of that again, whereby I'm self-employed because my contract says this and this. Does that solve the problem? No, it just means then it's got to be tested in reality. So you've still got the full inquiry. And you're also going to have some people who are absolutely clearly self-employed, but if they can't provide a substitute, they're going to get caught by the test. If you're hiring somebody, you might be hiring a super specialist in that industry, one of only half a dozen people. You want them in a particular location, so that probably reduces them to one of 2 or 3 people, and the other 2 are already on contracts. It's that one person. They could be working in all of the ways that we'd all accept as being self-employed, but because they can't send a substitute, bang, you can't. I mean, it's just silly. Imagine, we go back to TV presenters. I'm not sure what the rules are around TV presenters sending substitutes, but I'm fairly sure BBC and ITV wouldn't like it if we just rocked up for Lorraine Kelly at some point. Well,
give it a go.
So you've got to, say there's going to be a hell of a lot of thought, and better people than I will come up with the answers to that, I think, because I struggle as to how you can make it simple, easy to understand, and yet effective without capturing loads of people that really ought not to be. Time barred. You might even have you can be fine self-employed, but once you've been on the books for more than 6 months or whatever the figure is, you're automatically caught. That's probably going to cut out it's going to reduce the long-term ones.
Yeah. If you had an opportunity to contribute to any sort of policy around that sort of thing, do you think there's a case for industry or profession-specific type tests that really look into the specifics? So we've obviously talked a lot about people in the media industry, but are there special cases where actually you should specifically consider what the industry and the profession that individuals actually operate in a bit more detail, perhaps? It might not be that in every industry it's necessary, but some that should maybe have unique tests to them, or... Again, the short answer is how simple do you make it? And if you have one set of tests, no matter what industry you're working in, it's not going to be fit for purpose for every industry.
the difficulties if you then have exemptions or you have specific tests for each industry. Yeah, you're adding lots of complexities to it, and I suspect HMRC won't want to go there. We've already got that a little bit for national insurance purposes. Assuming NIC remains from an employment perspective going forward, who knows? But even that, they're trying to reduce those numbers gradually. So I think I'd probably be in favour of not having industry-specific tests, if I'm honest. Because then you, again, as soon as you put an extra layer of complexity in it, there will be those that go, "Oh, yeah, I know I'm a worker in the offshore oil industry, but I'm an installation pipe specialist, so actually that puts me under the plumbing rules or whatever." Take a stupid example.
Yeah. And in terms of case law, so we and in terms of looking at those status cases, a big area that is often confused is mutuality obligation.
Yeah.
So obviously we're awaiting the PGMOL referees result. I mean, do you think that will solve everything when it comes to MOO, or?
Well, as a Nottingham Forest fan, don't get me talking about referees. It's the first thing I'd say, because probably I'll be debarred. So there's been a lot of noise about mutuality, and quite rightly over the last few years. I think we'll end up with a position whereby it will be so the fact that you engage with somebody and you pay them for that engagement, HMRC seem to be saying that's sufficient now for it to create mutuality. The courts, at least at the minute, seem to have backed off from that a little bit. So if ultimately that's the final decision, I'd welcome that. But actually, how useful is that going to be? Because in most cases, when you hire a contingent worker, you're hiring them for a period of time. You're saying to them, right, we want you to work, 5 days a week, this number of hours at this site for these many weeks. I appreciate that you might have in the contract that you could end it with a week's notice or whatever. So you've got the ability to be flexible about the hiring of them. But at the point of taking them on, you have usually agreed a period of time that you're going to be using their services. They've agreed to make themselves available for that period of service. So in reality, I think that's probably going to create enough mutuality anyway. And if you're relying on changing it to get rid of that mutuality, then the contractors are going to be nervous about signing up for something where they've not got a flow of work. And your line managers are going to be nervous about hiring Fred, because Fred might not be here in a week's time, and they need somebody to fit in with the team that they've got. So I think mutuality is a great technical point to debate, but ultimately when it's all done and dusted, I don't think that's going to be the test that most employment status stands or falls on, if I'm honest.
No. So control and substitution will reign supreme in that regard.
Yeah, control being, I think, probably the one that, in my experience over the last few years, has become the biggie. Yeah. And quite rightly, I think, probably.
Yeah. We touched on MSc briefly earlier, which is an interesting one. And obviously we have these two accountancy firms who are awaiting tribunals at the moment. Again, what do you think HMRC's strategy is with that? Because it could be terrifying.
Well, if they are right in their assertions, then it can't just stop at the two that are the test cases. I genuinely think that they are wrong, but the legislation is worded widely enough, and in a nice possible way, where are we? 17 years after the legislation went live, and a little bit longer from when it was first started to be talked about. It's worded in a way which at least partially supports what HMRC's view of the world is now. And that's slightly worrying, because I can remember being in conversations with the technical lead at HMRC back in the day and talking about exactly how the contractor accountancy market operates, and them being absolutely clear that that's not what the legislation was meant to capture. And yet here we are. So I do have some concerns that if the cases get lost in court, that HMRC will use that as a bit of a bat to attack the wider profession.
Yeah.
And in the nicest possible way is they seem to dislike the idea of an accountancy business specialising in the contingent workforce space. Now, if you're a contractor working in a particular way, you don't want somebody who doesn't know how you operate. You want it to be as quick and as efficient and therefore as cheap as it possibly can be to do everything. You probably want it all online. You don't want to be the old-fashioned box of receipts going into the account at the end of the year. You want to be using apps and stuff like that. And I think HMRC just seems to take that as being full square in the MSC legislation.
It's bizarre, isn't it? I mean, it's natural in any kind of sector that if there are enough people doing a similar thing, you will end up with sausage factories. You will end up with specific accountancy providers who are going to target that market. And it definitely isn't what HMRC were looking to do or the government were looking to do in the first place, because obviously you did used to have those proper managed service company providers where you were getting a company off a shelf. Couldn't even choose your company name, and that you can see, you can understand why HMRC would want to do something about that. But that's not the case. That's not the case with these ones. So
no.
Strange. But,
Well, and you speak to contractors. Why do you use them? Well, because I want. Some of these people work internationally. They want to have 24/7 access to what their accounts and that are. They want to understand what cash they've got in the bank, etc., etc. And they don't want to take days off to go and sit in a stuffy accountant's office or whatever.
Yeah, and more generally across financial services as a whole, that's a recognised way for clients to engage with their banks or financial advisors or their investment houses or their pension people, using apps and technologies and dashboards and various things like that is very, very commonplace now.
Yeah. Well, as someone who had their Wi-Fi go down the other day, trying to speak to a human being without going through 15 different apps and chatbots. I mean, that is the way of the world, isn't it?
Yeah.
Exactly. What about umbrellas? So
Good question.
Very nice.
Yeah.
So, clearly the IR35, the off-payroll rules in Chapter 10 created a boom for the umbrella market in terms of the sheer volume of people who were, whether by choice or otherwise, were having to use umbrella companies. And more recently, there's obviously been talk about regulation.
Yep.
That seems to have just been kicked down the road by this government. Do you think it's needed? And do you think it will happen?
So I think it's probably needed. I think it will happen, but I come back to probably what we'll end up with is not what's needed or what will help. So we'll end up with some extra regulation whereby the compliant organisations will have to invest a lot of time and energy to remain within the spirit as well as the letter of the legislation. And then you'll have those that probably either don't care or don't know or aren't operating appropriately now, with just another set of legislation that they're ignoring or not dealing with properly. So, I think it does need something. Certainly, HMRC, when we talked about previously to them about some form of regulatory framework a long time ago, thought it was a good idea, but didn't want to be doing it themselves. If you look at it almost like as an MOT test or whatever, they don't want to be the MOT testers. They want it to be done by a third party. Whether the new Labour agency under Margaret Beale's leadership will take on that, I think it probably will in the end. I think time will tell. Maybe a change of government will. I don't know will that give it greater impetus? Possibly. Is it the first thing they'll do? I'd like to think not. I think we've got more important things to worry about. So I suspect that there will be something in the not too distant future, and I'd welcome it, but I worry that it will not necessarily be as fit for purpose. It will not stop the bad players. It would just be another set of rules that they're not following.
And something you just touched on there, and obviously at the time of recording this, we've just had the announcement that there's going to be a general election in a few weeks' time. I'm sure you are asked, as we are, this question quite a lot. What are Labour going to do with IR35? Do you have any insight? Or do you... What's the...
I'll have a chat with Keir and see what he says. So I'm going to answer it, but not. Bear with me. And that is that we don't know what's going to happen. But almost I don't think it necessarily matters. There's going to be an element of if we do end up with a change of government, we are going to, I would assume, because Labour have put the future of work into their manifesto, or at least they're working towards manifesto. So I would expect some pressure there to be applied around worker rights, and somewhere around that will be an IR35 look-see. So I think there will be a little bit more impetus. I'm not expecting any massive changes from an IR35 perspective
you don't think we'll
beyond
have
what we've already
talked
Repeal
What a
to
total reverse. Well, if you're going to use foul and abusive language towards me, the thing is with IR35, whilst it's got its problems, certainly in its existing way of living, I'm not sure repealing it would be an answer. I know people would like it to be at times, but I think that just again ends up with lots of people operating who should be clearly employees.
It creates a lot more problems, doesn't it?
Well, and then you're going to end up those who are genuinely operating in business. They're still going to have the old Chapter 8 or whatever the new chapter becomes tests. So I don't think it's going to disappear. Otherwise, it would be a little bit of the Wild West out there. I'd like them to think that whoever is the next government will look at it and try and just, dare I say, at the moment there's a lot of time and energy spent by compliant organisations trying to prove that they're compliant, and the non-compliant organisations are probably not necessarily coming to the crosshairs as much as they ought to be. So maybe it's instead of bringing in a whole new set of rules, maybe it's more a case of just doing a good job with the legislation you've got at the moment, frankly.
It's going to be an interesting few weeks, that's for sure.
Well, just as you think it's safe to go back in the water, isn't it?
I know. So one thing that we always invite our guests to do is to put a question to our audience. So we'll put it out on our socials. So do you have a question for our readership?
I do. So it's probably a better way of putting it, but bear with me. On the huge assumption that there will be some form of statutory employment test, and the caveat that it will be introduced after appropriate consultation, and that they listen to that consultation, and that the tests themselves turn out to be as good as we probably can get, with the imperfections I've already mentioned previously. So on the assumption that we're going to get a statutory employment test, do people think that that's going to solve all the problems? Will it just create even more problems, or will it somewhere be in the middle, which is it will solve some problems, but it will probably push up others from that we don't know about yet. So I suppose really is if everybody wants a statutory employment test, and I'm not suggesting that everybody does, but if we end up getting one, will it help? Will it hinder? Or will it just be a different problem?
Interesting question.
Yeah, it is.
All right. Well, thank you very much, John.
Yes,
It's been great to have you on, and thanks for all your expert insight. And thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time. Please subscribe to our channel for immediate news updates. See you next time.